So the trailer for Spider-Man 2 came out and it looks amazing. So we are covering the story that the game is largely based off of, which is Kraven's Last Hunt, one of the most iconic stories that have ever been written in the history of Spider-Man. So what this does here, and really a little bit of explanation to offer before we get into this picks up with Spider-Man basically wearing his black suit along with the death of Ned Leeds. So the first thing is that with Ned Leeds, he was a field reporter that worked at the Daily Bugle and was, if I remember correctly, at one point, the boyfriend of Betty Brant. The idea behind this is that he'd been sent on a task by J. Jonah Jameson to track down the hobgoblin Roderick Kingsley. Kingsley ended up drugging Ned Leeds and then more or less tricked the world into thinking that Ned Leeds was the actual Hobgoblin when he wasn't. And then in turn, Kingsley dumped the identity of Hobgoblin as being Ned Leeds, which led to Ned Leeds being killed by gangsters. Peter Parker discovered the body, and he's kind of been struggling ever since. The more important thing here is that this story takes place before the events of Amazing Spider-Man 258 in 1984, but it takes place after Secret Wars. So what that means is that Peter Parker has what we now call the Venom suit, but in Spider-Man 258 is when he got rid of it. So he's still wearing the suit at this point in time. But it is an important distinction because what he ends up doing is basically catching up to these gangsters, kind of committing crimes and doing the Spider-Man stuff and, you know, facing off against them and trying to defeat them and so on and so forth. What's important about this is that they fear Spider-Man in this day and age, as opposed to the Peter Parker of years past where they were more concerned about him, but they weren't really fearful of him in the same way that they would be afraid of like Batman in DC Comics. And that's one of the things that I want you to notice about Kraven's Last Hunt. One, this story was written with a much darker tone than a traditional Spider-Man story. And two, the way the criminals view Spider-Man is very reminiscent of how criminals view Batman in DC Comics. They're afraid of him. And the reason for that is because during the time when Peter Parker was in possession of the Venom symbiote, before he realized what it was in Spider-Man 258, is that he, one, would lose sleep at night because the symbiote would literally travel around in his body at night and commit like various superhero antics. But two, when the Venom symbiote was doing that, he was very vigilante-like. So people started to see Spider-Man as more of a vigilante than a traditional superhero. So it's cool in terms of how his character had evolved up to this point in time. That's one of the reasons why Peter talks about how he has a hard time sleeping, because some of this is due to the nightmares that he has of Venom and the symbiote and its influence and so on. But here in this part of the story, it's more like a sixth sense, right? He has this feeling that someone out there is hunting him. Someone out there is looking for him. Now, a lot of this goes into the nature of Kraven the Hunter. And Kraven is this guy, this guy's Old Testament, man. Fire, brimstone, wrath of God, to quote Fast and the Furious. That's what this guy is, right? He's old school. He comes from the days of like Tsarist Russia before the fall of the Tsar Empire and the rise of the Soviet Union, really communist Russia under Leon Trotsky and Vladimir Lenin. So this guy is super old hat. But the bigger thing here is he's very much a character that's reminiscent of the book The Most Dangerous Game, where he does to a degree find some measure of satisfaction in hunting like dangerous animals, but what he actually prefers is to hunt the most dangerous game possible, whether it's superheroes or just a person who's some kind of crazy, capable mercenary or something like that. Whatever it is, he likes pushing himself to the limits. The reality of this is he's routinely been defeated by Spider-Man over and over and over again. So much so that between the fact that Spider-Man's defeated him in years past, combined with Kraven's view of himself and the darker nature of Spider-Man in more recent years, leads Kraven to believe that there's almost something mythological about Spider-Man, that he's more than simply just a man. I wouldn't go as far as to use the phrase godlike, but I would go as far as to say that Kraven sees him as almost something supernatural in physical form. Now, what's ironic about this is that it was actually Mateus kind of beating J. Michael Straczynski to the punch, because Straczynski came along and he's the one that introduced the idea of spider totems, the other, that Peter Parker, by being Spider-Man, tapped into a level of power that was hitherto unknown to him or seemingly anybody else. All that stuff came much, much later, but it is a cool thing to kind of tie into, right? To kind of keep in the back of your mind. But regardless, Kraven intends to hunt Spider-Man and then basically kill him. And so what he does in preparation of this is he immerses himself in spiders and then starts eating them. Like, he literally starts eating spiders. Now, he's not doing this because he's insane. He is. He's kind of more or less nuts because of the fact that he's been defeated by Spider-Man. What little sanity he had left basically went out the window, right? This guy belonged to the loony bin. But the thing about this is that in his mind, it's actually him preparing for the fight against Spider-Man. One of the things that he'll say later on when he's facing Peter Parker is, I have partaken of your flesh, i.e. I have eaten spiders, so now I have basically taken over, or at least I'm able to tap into the power that you have. It's as much symbolic as it is outright crazy, because in a lot of ways, it really is Kraven saying, now I'm on your level, right? That kind of a thing. Kind of a whole tradition beginning the rite of proving, if you want to call it that. But the thing about this is that as Peter's making his way to the city, Kraven's dropped off by his forces. Now, that's one of the things that I do want to point out about Kraven the Hunter. Very rarely do you ever see him go into a hunt with like a whole task force, because for Kraven, it's considered dishonorable. For Kraven, like the beauty and the joy in the hunt is that he can do it on his own, that he doesn't need anybody else to pull that off. They may provide him with some resources, but when it comes down to the actual act of Kraven hunting down a person and attacking them, it really is just his thing, right? It's what he does by himself. And so one of the cool things that happens here is he offers a sort of inner monologue, which is incredibly important, right? He says, for years, the spider has thwarted me, mocked me, humiliated me. In the beginning, I was naive. I thought he was a man, but he couldn't possibly be a man. No man could do to Kraven what the spider has. No man. So black, so inhuman, so beautiful. You exist to test me, don't you? To taunt and challenge me. And I cannot rest until I have proven myself, until I have destroyed you. I cannot rest. This is incredibly valuable insight into the mind of Kraven, because again, he's very much a man of tradition and honor within the confines of his goal of tracking people down and attacking them and killing them. But it shows that he views Peter as being more than just a guy running around in a Spider-Man suit. He sees him as almost mythological, right? Like this being that's been put on the earth to test Kraven, the ultimate hunt, right? The ultimate thing that he can track down and kill. It's just his own personal vendetta. And that's one of the cool things about Kraven. It's not about levels of power, right? I mean, if he was like, I'm going to track down the thing that's really going to test me based on power, he'd be trying to kill the Molecule Man Owen Reese, right? Or like the Beyonder when he was on Earth, or maybe the Incredible Hulk. But it's all about symbolism. It's all about what Peter represents in the life of Kraven, which is just this unattainable goal, the one that always eludes him. And so as Peter is making his way to the city, he's shot at by a dart. Now, of course, his spider sense allows him to basically dodge it, but then he's hit the second time. And when that happens, what ends up going on is he starts to hallucinate. While he's hallucinating, he's bobbing and weaving, trying to get away from Kraven. But the whole time, Kraven's offering this amazing monologue, right? He says, come to me, my spider. Tonight, I have widened my consciousness with herbs and roots. Tonight, I have immersed myself in your being, eaten of your flesh, of course, referring to the spiders. And he says, tonight, my mind has penetrated your essence. It feasts upon you like maggots feasting upon a corpse. Come to me. And that's what's so cool, is because Kraven, despite just being a pretty capable guy, is able to subdue Spider-Man and almost kind of taunts him. But again, the almost mythological perception of Peter Parker in the mind of Kraven still comes home to roost. For Peter Parker, the reason why he's not able to easily overcome Kraven is really just stated in his words, right? He talks about how his muscles are getting stiff, how he can hardly lift his head. He can't differentiate between what's true and what's false. The illusions, he knows they're illusions, but the issue here is that he doesn't truly realize what's actually going on with Kraven. For example, he hallucinates Joe Face, but it's actually Kraven the Hunter who's there. So it's one of the things that makes this so incredibly dangerous. Kraven tracking this guy down ultimately corners Spider-Man. He shoots him with a net, literally catches him in place, and then in turn pulls out a rifle and shoots Spider-Man on the spot, just executes him in plain sight. And so following that, you have just this kind of ceremonial moment where Kraven has Spider-Man buried on his own estate. He has Spider-Man buried at his own location, literally just buries this guy, covers him in dirt, and so passes Spider-Man. But the question you have to ask here is that if this is the first issue, what happens in the rest of the four? And I promise you, it gets crazy. Like it's one of the most insane stories that has ever been written in the history of Marvel. It's also arguably the greatest Spider-Man story ever written. So with that being said, we're gonna bring this to an end. Let me know in the comments if you guys wanna see more. If you do, we'll cover it next week, and I will catch you all later. Peace.